All right. Welcome to the third episode. I'm getting old now.
I thought I was going to lead this one off.
Oh, you want to leave this one?
No, it's okay.
Welcome to the third episode of Converse Cousins with Mike and Mark. I am your co-host, Mike Saltzman, and with me, as always, is my cousin Mark.
I'm here.
And we'll be discussing new topics every couple of weeks. We are together for the third episode of our series, How to Fix Your Favorite Sport. Our sport this week is Major League Baseball.
It literally is my favorite sport.
This is our favorite sport. Major League Baseball this week. And we have several rule changes we want to see in Major League Baseball.
It is opening day for the Giants, home opener. And we're violating Major League Baseball copyright rules right now by showing you the game for a half second. I don't think they'll mind.
Yeah, well, if we were winning, maybe they'd mind. I don't know.
And I'm also sporting the colors and
as well.
This is Matt Cain over here.
Absolutely.
Legendary Giant Matt Cain.
2012 World Series Matt Cain. That was my favorite Matt Cain.
The Giants right now are getting crushed by the Tampa Bay Rays, but maybe they'll be doing
in
better.
real time. It's 4-0. By the time you see this, it'll be like 42-0.
Well, hopefully not.
the Rays are good.
We're optimistic Giants fans.
So we have several rule changes that MLB will immediately adopt once we provide them to them in this podcast. So we are excited about that. We will be discussing quite a few things, and why don't you go ahead and get us started?
I think they may have already adopted some, just anticipating what we're going to say.
Yeah, I think so. So what's your first thought?
Well, should we start with the umpire situation?
Sure. How much we love him. Let's go.
Angel Hernandez is my favorite umpire.
Oh, man. If I had a nickel for everyone that said that, I would be broke.
So we talked a little bit about this with regard to other sports. With baseball, I mean, I'm looking at it right here on the screen. We've got this white box of strike zone, and so every pitch that's thrown is automatically coded as a ball or a strike. But then sometimes you see the umpire goofs it up, which is like probably once an inning at least.
Once in a bat.
Yeah. So then, there's a human element to being an umpire, and we're not just talking about home plate umpires, but there's a human element to it that's always been part of the game, right? Where an umpire establishes his own strike zone, and then, as long as he's consistent with it, I think the players are kind of okay with it. But when the inconsistencies start to come in, that's when people get real fired up. So anyway, so there's an argument for making the home plate umpire's job just done by technology. Like, let's just get a robot in there. Let's just have automatic review of pitches, and no need for a human being there. And then with regard to the other umpires, fair and foul line calls and plays at first, plays at second base, could be similar. We could just get rid of umpires altogether. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if getting rid of umpires altogether is the right answer, but what I do think is that home plate umpires should no longer be in charge of the strike zone. They can simply implement whether it's a strike or a ball based on the technology. And then if a guy's sliding it home and there's a tag, they can be there for that call. And this is like prestige of being the home plate umpire has what's brought with it is guys having this power hungry strike zone that they can change at any moment's notice. And to me, that's not good for the game. And we saw it this week in the Astros game where Ron Kolpa basically was like, I can do whatever I want. And, as an umpire, there's some minuscule truth to that, but in reality, it's not. That's not good for any sport to think you have that much power to be able to make the rules as you go. But you're implementing the rules of the sport, and you should be consistent with that.
There's a lot of good umpires out there. I mean,
That's true.
This is a job for a human being, right? Like, what's next? Like, the guy at McDonald's is going to be a robot serving me my quarter pounder with cheese?
I don't think there will ever be a time in most sports where there would be actual robots in charge of like the rule implementations. What I do think though is that the strike
kind of cool though.
I have two ideas on the strike zone. One is that if the Major League Baseball feels like the human element is too important, then one compromise could be that the white box on the screen that we see could be adjusted for each umpire. And what their strike zone is, a low strike or a high strike or a wide strike, that box would then be created for that umpire every game.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of him calling the balls and strikes, the system would then just announce if that's a ball or a strike based on his strike zone.
I wonder if the umpires do it on purpose, though. You know what I mean? Like Ron Culpa is coming out there. He's like, my strike zone is up and away, or whatever.
Like, well, I mean,
probably not.
I don't know. I don't know how accurate. As much as we love Mike Krukow, I don't know if he necessarily is always as accurate about knowing the umpires' strike zones.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, one of the things he's always mentioning in his commentary, usually in the first couple innings, is what the strike zone is for that umpire,
mm-hmm.
not what the strike zone is.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually think in some ways it does a disservice to umpires to have that box on the screen,
mm-hmm.
because if that's not their strike zone, then they're going to look bad every time they make a call on a high strike.
Right.
If that's what they're calling all day,
yeah.
then to go back to what you're saying is, for most sports, no matter what the rules are, if a ref is consistent, even if they're consistently wrong, if they're consistent, then players can adjust during the game.
Right. Yeah.
So when the Giants lost in San Diego a few nights ago, and it was on 2 strikeouts that were both called strike threes on Parra and Belt, they were furious. They were furious because where that ball was had not been called a strike all game.
Mm-hmm.
So even whether it was a strike or not was secondary to that hasn't been a strike all day.
Yeah.
And so to go back to your idea of the human element, that's a part of the human element that players have adjusting to.
Mm-hmm.
Like they get that if a guy's a high strike guy, that I have to protect the high strike.
Mm-hmm.
But that means if a ball is at my knees, it's going to be called a ball.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that changes in the 8th inning or 9th inning, that can really mess with a guy, because it's like, well, now what are you doing?
Yeah.
So if Bumgarner's strike zone's getting squeezed and he feels like he's not getting a call he deserves, or if Belt, takes a pitch that's normally a ball and it's suddenly called a strike, there's easy frustration there. Now, to that point, no player is perfect. And
I just watched, there was like a pitch from the Rays pitcher right here,
mm-hmm.
Tyler Glasnow.
Yeah.
Right down the middle, called a ball.
Yeah. Well, and you know what happened there? I caught it in my eye too, because Belt went to bunt, took it back. Yeah. The ball was a curveball.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the umpire saw how it landed.
Yeah.
Because of Belt getting in the way.
That's a human element right there.
So there's a perfect example of the human element that you didn't see while we talked about it, and I'm sure it was entertaining.
It was over here. I can just do this instead of showing my face. Sorry. Major League Baseball, I apologize.
No, we're way better looking than Brandon Belt.
Well, that's true.
Knock the snot out of
that.
This has been a great podcast so far.
That's
just
good.
us watching the Giants game and then randomly talking baseball.
That's how professionals do it, right?
But I think when it comes to the umpires, they have more power than they should based on how they're acting on their power. And maybe that sounds extreme, but I do think that taking balls and strikes away from them and creating a universal strike zone that everyone can agree on, which has essentially been established with these K-zone boxes.
Mm-hmm.
But we have the technology to instantly make ball and strike calls. It's not like instant replay in most sports, or even instant replay in baseball, where it would take a minute and a half per pitch to figure out if it's a ball or a strike. I mean, it's instantaneous. And if you're doing that, then I think it makes a lot more sense to just have that, to just have that be the strike zone. And that way, if there's a pitch in low and outside and it hits the mark, it's a strike. And if it doesn't, it's not. And then there's no arguing there. They tried to eliminate arguing, right? With all the replays and stuff. It's like now umpires and managers don't yell at each other as much. There aren't as many guys coming out and yelling and kicking up dirt and whatever. Yeah. And they wanted to get rid of that. Well, one way to help that is to make a universal strike zone. Mm-hmm. So, because that seems to be the only reason that umpires get throw guys out anymore is when they won't shut up about the strike zone being bad. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Now you can eliminate.
Unless you think that managers getting upset and yelling at the umpire is another traditional part of the game that should be maintained. I mean, I think that's going to run through our whole podcast.
That's certainly one of the most memorable parts of the game. Is when a manager loses their stuff.
The Earl Weaver or the Billy Martin or whatever. But I think for me it's like, there's a lot of tradition in baseball. Probably more so in the U.S. than any other sport at this point. So For me, it comes down to, okay, let's go back to 1905 with Christy Mathewson on the mound, and suppose somebody that day is like, hey, Christy Mathewson, or what was the manager's name, John McGraw. Hey, John McGraw, there's this technology that will allow balls and strikes to be called, automatically. We can eliminate the need for an umpire. He probably would have been like, bring it on. You know what I mean? Because if you go back to that time in history, that baseball was only around for 30, 40 years. People were still figuring it out.
Yeah.
So I think if you eliminate that example sort of eliminates the tradition kind of argument to all of these things, and we go back to a time when baseball was new, and if we'd eliminated umpires back then or made it all automatic, I think everybody would have been in favor of it. So I think that's going to be my measuring stick. Would Christy Mathewson and John McGraw have approved?
I think that'll be actually how we decide to answer each one of the following.
There you go. Yeah.
What questions.
Would Christy
to add to that though is the reason the umpires needed to have so much power, because you look at like a check swing, right? There's never going to be a perfect response to a check swing. Sometimes umpires look at it differently, whatever. But baseball started before radio. Baseball started before TV. So the only way to make sure a game was being run properly was to give the umpires a lot of leeway on decisions. Yeah. You didn't have instant replay. You didn't have anyone that could go to anything and be able to second guess anything. It was just eyes. It was just what you saw. Yeah. And so there's so many rules in place that are umpire discretion, and it's because they had to be then. They don't have to be now. Right. We have the technology to help umpires be more efficient, and the strike zone is the most extreme of those. I mean, whether a ball's fair or foul, and when other things like that, they aren't as commonly a problem. The strike zone seems to be a game-to-game problem with how inconsistent it is, and it's okay for an umpire to make a mistake, but how those mistakes are handled right now is, it seems like the Major League Baseball is like, we don't really care. Like, it's just part of the game. Yeah. Deal with it. And that doesn't make sense to me, considering the technology that we have now.
It also doesn't change the record books either. Like, if we're worried about pitchers, like, statistics changing because now the strike zone is standardized. Baseball
and also think of how different
tomorrow.
Baseball would be if we had done it 10, 20 years ago. Not that we necessarily had the technology that long ago, but if a guy's in a 2-2 count and it would have been strike 3, and instead he hits a grand slam the next pitch, it's like that changes history.
True.
Yeah. And there were definitely some World Series that had moments like that, right? So
well, baseball, the record books have a special kind of
definitely the most
status. But then they kind of got screwed up by the steroid era a little bit. These guys that hit 600 and 700 home runs, like we're kind of rubbing our foreheads trying to figure out what it all means. So,
well, and then whether it was greenies or betting on the game, I mean, there's been cheating in different fashions since since competition.
True. Maybe we've just gotten better at detecting it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the next thing we had was the designated hitter. Yeah. So the first thing about the DH that's funny to me is that if that was something that in 2019 became a thought, like, let's add the designated hitter. Pitchers no longer are good hitters. Let's incorporate this. We have aging players who need a place to play for a few more years, but they're just not very good defensively. Or we just have an amazing hitter who's not very good defensively. Let's create the designated hitter. That if it was coming now in 2019, the one thing I can almost guarantee is that one of the options would not be, okay, let's just put it in the American League. Yeah. Like, the idea that it went in just the American League is hilarious. Yeah.
Especially now with interleague play. I mean, it's all one league a little bit more than it used to be.
Well, and to give that some context, part of the reason that it was only put in the American League is that those two leagues definitely treated themselves as separate leagues outside of the World Series and the All-Star game. Yeah. And so it really was two different commissioners, the whole thing. So that makes it make sense that then it was, the American League embraced the DH, and the National League was like, no, we don't want it. And so it made sense. It would be similar to the NFL adopting something when the AFL was going, and the AFL not adopting it. it would have been the same thing in a lot of ways, even though it was the same overall umbrella league, because they literally had multiple commissioners.
Mm-hmm. But not anymore.
And so, now it's, what should we do? Should we have a universal DH? Should we get rid of the DH, or should we keep it as it is? And, as much as us as Giants fans love Madison Bumgarner and the other pitchers in baseball that can hit, I don't think it's going to hurt the game to have a DH universally. I think it does make sense for a lot of reasons. I think the only way I would like it to happen is if it also included adding at least one more player to the rosters. I know that some of the rules that we were talk about today was about part of it was adding a 26th player to the rosters, and then and that. But to me, if you're going to add a universal DH, then you need to add another roster spot so that teams can have either an extra pitcher or an extra hitter, depending. So to kind of balance things out. And so if it went to 27 players instead of 26, then to me that makes more sense. Plus, the Giants have already proven in the past that when they have played interleague play, there was already one game in Madison Bumgarner's career where he pitched and was the DH, that he was the designated hitter,
and the Shohei Ohtanis of the world could there's another guy for Tampa Bay now in the minor league system, Brendan McKay. I don't know if you looked him up.
Yeah.
He's like a two-way guy.
Well, and two-way guys are becoming more and more of a thing. That if guys can pitch, that the idea of being a relief pitcher and bench player makes you more versatile, and it makes you more likely to make a roster on a 25 or 26 man roster now. The Giants are doing that with bringing in guys like Valera and keeping someone like Sandoval and trying to bring in guys like Connor Joe. They're trying to bring in guys that can do multiple things.
Hopefully, by the time you're watching this, Connor Joe will actually have a major league hit. Poor guy, I think, is still over 13 or 14.
He's not starting today, so it might be a few more innings. But
look, for the DH, I have always been a National League guy, and it runs in the family. I mean, we're all Giants fans. My dad was definitely not into the DH, did not want it. Was more entertained by the prospect of double switches and pinch hitting and the strategy. Do you take the pitcher out of the game? Do you not? Because you need the runs, but it's only the fifth inning. Stuff like that. There's an element of strategy to it. There's also an old school argument that if a pitcher pitches inside, right? Suppose like Bumgarner's just throwing up and in the whole game. Well, then he has to come up himself at some point. And so then so if he's doing that, then he has to face the music and get thrown up and into as well.
Right.
Which is that comes from the Christy Mathewson era, perhaps, like way back in the day. It was a little bit more violent.
I'll start charting the number of times you reference Christy Mathewson.
At least 5 now. But anyway, there's some tradition to it, and I think there's some purity to it. But if we're going to use the throwing up and in retaliation kind of argument, I don't think anybody's going to go for that at this point, because
that wouldn't be the one reason to do
we don't want to get people don't want. I mean, we don't want people getting hurt. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We've seen these there is something to that, though, that American League pitchers tend to be a little bit more gutsy about throwing inside and those things because they know they don't hit. And so there is something to that it happens more in the American League when you don't have to face the music, to your point. So there was definitely some of that going on. So, I'm a National League guy too. I've said, death the designated hitter. I wrote an article a few years ago saying, don't you dare bring the DH to the National League. What was your main argument? What was the thing?
I think it was Madison Kyle Bumgarner. That's my main argument.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
That he doesn't want it, so why I wouldn't dare want it. But
so Madison, if you're watching, no DH. Don't worry about
it.
But
that being said, if
you're watching,
if they're going to make a change, it does make sense to have it universally, because considering the way the sport's gone, I'm always going to be an advocate for a few more roster spots and have a few more places, and on the roster for players. And so adding a DH could increase the number of players that have major league contracts. And considering what we're going to talk about in a few minutes with the minor league system, Anyone that can get a major league deal will make me a happier guy for what it can do for the sport.
Well, also I think for me the idea with the DH, we've had this split now in the American and National Leagues for a long time, right? So anybody who's grown up a baseball player over the last 40 years has now had this split that they're kind of looking forward to someday if they become a big leaguer, right? So, this has been implemented for a long time, but what's happened is now all the lower levels of baseball, from Little League to high school to, college, everybody uses a DH, right?
Right.
So then,
when is the pitcher supposed to pitch?
Yeah, so you identify yourself as a 14-year-old pitcher that's, really good, then you're not probably going with the Shohei Ohtani approach at that point to your training. You're going with just let's drop the hitting a little bit more and focus more on the pitching. And so then you're trying to get that major league contract someday. Then you end up in the National League and you're like, oh crap, now I got to hit. You know what I mean? You haven't been working on this for 10, 15 years.
Right.
So when the training is kind of, not going in that direction from an early age, then it's kind of weird to have half of the league and only one league in the world that doesn't use a DH. The National League really stands out at that point as being an anomaly. So then people, even internationally, who are trying to prepare, are not really able to do that. Or they're at some sort of disadvantage when they come into the National League if they're not, good hitters. So when the National League stands out as the only league in the whole world, do we know if they use the DH in Japan? They probably do, right? The Caribbean leagues in Mexico and.
I would think in most leagues, but I don't have that.
We'll get back to you on that, but I would assume that there's not a lot of leagues around the world that don't use the DH. So,
considering how specialized pitching has become, it's the idea that a young pitcher would waste any time hitting if they think they have a shot at a major league contract or to get drafted or whatever. Is kind of silly, and so especially considering that there's actually no. If you're good enough as a pitcher, they're not going to care that you can't hit. Yeah. And so that again is another reason to just eliminate it. Even though it kind of goes against what kind of we grew up with and what we would actually want. I think ultimately, if you really had to make a decision, it's like, well, then you put the DH across the board and you allow the best players to play the spots on the field. And like I said, it wouldn't prohibit Madison Bumgarner from being a DH on some nights or pinch hitting.
Yeah,
so
and he,
guys that could hit could still hit.
Right, and he's going to be more valuable to his team if he can actually pull off a Shohei Ohtani kind of thing where he can hit and pitch at the same time. So,
or put Bumgarner in left.
Yeah, I'd like to see him play the field.
All right, so the next thing we had.
But just to clarify, from an entertainment perspective, I'm still not on board with the DH because I do like the double switches and the strategy and the seeing the pitchers hit. When a pitcher gets a hit, like a Bumgarner hits a home run, that's from a fan standpoint, that's really fun. Well, and for me, it's worth seeing Derek Holland go up and wave at 3 balls in a row wildly and miss. The bad moments for pitchers for me are worth seeing the fun moments where they actually.
Bartolo Colon.
Yeah.
That alone. His worst moments as a hitter and his one home run are some of the most entertaining moments in baseball history.
Like when a relief pitcher gets an at bat. I put down my
Santiago Casillas walk.
Yeah, I put down my phone and I'm watching that at bat because it's super fun to watch.
Absolutely.
So I'm from an entertainment standpoint, I'm still a no DH guy.
Yeah, hitters pitching and pitchers hitting are definitely a spot of entertainment.
That's true. Yeah, the Pablo Sandoval on the mound thing that was fun. All right. Anyway.
All right. So I'll go over this one real quick just because it means a lot to me and I know we don't necessarily in disagreement here, but just wanted to get it out there. But minor league hitters, pitchers, players do not make any money. There's a few guys that'll get a huge signing bonus, but that's about it. Most players are making $10,000, $12,000 a year, and they cannot afford to be a professional baseball player. A lot of guys retire because they can't afford to do it. They can't afford to buy food on the road. They can't afford to buy clothes. They can't afford to do most things. but more than all that, it is important as all that is. They can't afford to train for baseball the 6 months of the off season. So to become better at the sport they're trying to be good at, they can't do it. So if Major League Baseball is really going to ever thrive to the maximum potential that they could, they need to start paying their minor leaguers enough money to be able to be a professional baseball player. And
makes
that
the
doesn't
game better.
And it doesn't even have to be that much more money, but if they doubled their salary or tripled their salary to where they're making anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 a year, that's enough money for them to be able to afford an apartment. That's enough money for them to be able to train in the off season and not have to work 2 or 3 side jobs just to make ends meet while they're trying to become a 32nd round pick that gets them make it to the major leagues. And because Major League Baseball is a multi-billion-dollar sport, they can afford to take $50 million and put it down to the minor leagues. They can afford to put $150 million and put it down to the minor leagues. And if everyone in the minor league system had a piece of those kind of pies, they would be able to be better baseball players for those teams.
Yeah.
And on top of that, minor league players should have some voice in the union. Right now, they have zero voice. Only major league players have a voice. And so a lot of these issues don't get talked about enough at the major league level, because once you're there, now your focus is on things for you and not necessarily things for your younger brothers down in the minor leagues.
Yeah. Seems like it's a product of like we pay so much attention, we, the fans, the media, everybody, to big league ball, and the minor league ball gets kind of swept under the rug. And so all the resources, all the attention, all the money gets to sent into major league ball, which for the most part is deserved in the sense that they get the TV contracts and the fans and the interest is there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, minor leaguers are forgotten. They certainly
well, and think about it this way too.
more.
If you let's just look at the Giants. So if you invested money to upgrade all the facilities even more, maybe the Giants buy apartment complexes in the nearby areas of each one of those parks, and build the facilities, the practice facilities, so that it actually incentivizes a player that it actually would make sense for them to just stay in that town in the off season, or maybe you build more more places for them to stay in Arizona or Florida, whatever the case may be for depending on the team. That if the players could stay in San Jose and stay in Augusta and stay in Richmond and stay in Sacramento in the off season to train because they had an apartment, they had the facilities, whatever, then that would allow them to not only be better baseball players, but it would also be a smart way for the team to monitor how their players are doing, have coaches there to help them, along the way, and streamline a lot of that stuff. Because a lot of guys do end up in Arizona at the practice facilities there, but if they can't afford to do that the whole off season because they can't afford to live, then that makes no sense. So however you did it, you could also end up helping those communities. Not that San Jose necessarily needs help, but whether it's Sacramento or Richmond or Augusta, Salem, Kaiser, some of these places that the Giants have teams, those smaller communities could end up getting, even better, because those players might have more money to help, facilitate more things in that community. Now they've invested some more time there, and there's a lot of benefits that Major League Baseball would get from doing this, and ultimately you'd be investing in a lot of guys that you said you believed in when you drafted them.
It's almost like we're stuck in 1945 or something. Like Major League Ball was here, minor league ball was here, and then like in that around then, like Major League Ball took off in terms of resources, money, whatever, media attention, and then minor league ball kind of stayed where it was in this huge gulf.
Well, yeah, if you made $12,000 a year in 1945, you're doing great. If you're making $12,000 now, you can't afford to live. Yeah. So considering it's someone that they've invested money in, invested time in, you'd think they'd want to help them continue that. Yeah. So that's a little disappointing. The other thing I wanted to bring up on this podcast was the idea of arbitration and free agency, because we've seen it the last couple of years especially, but for every Bryce Harper and Manny Machado contract, there are guys like Adam Jones who took a small deal. with Arizona, Gio Gonzalez, who had to take a minor league deal despite being a playoff, a good playoff pitcher for Milwaukee last year. Players like Dallas Keuchel and Craig Kimbrell still don't have jobs. There's a lot of problems with the free agency system, but one of them is the age of the players when they finally hit free agency. Right now, you need 2 years of MLB service to become arbitration eligible. Then you are arbitration eligible for 4 years, and then you can be a free agent.
Seems like a long time.
If you are 22 or 21 out of college, or even 18 out of high school, it takes you more than likely 4 or 5 years to get through the minors. Most players, it takes them 4 or 5 years. So you're anywhere from 22 and a rookie if you're straight out of high school, or 24, 25, 26 if you're out of college. And then with that, those 6 more years means that the average free agent is anywhere from 28 to 32. That's usually around the age most free agents are for the first time. A 28-year-old free agent, or even a 26-year-old like Machado and Harper, which is very rare. It's almost never that case.
They both started when they were really young.
Well, and Harper got signed 2 years before most guys get signed, with the route that he took to get to the major leagues. So it's very rare that a 26-year-old is ever available in free agency. Usually it's 28 is the youngest. And if you're a 28-year-old free agent, you do have a chance of getting a 5-year contract or more if you're one of the elite players. But whether it's Kimbrel and Keuchel, or whether it's guys like Carlos Gonzalez and Adam Jones and Gio Gonzalez that got basically nothing compared to what they've made in their careers to sign with teams, you see that what general managers are doing is seeing that it's not worth it to pay guys for what they've already done, and they're going to only want to pay what they think they'll do in the future, which is not an unheard of concept. And it doesn't mean that they're wrong to do that, but from that, what needs to happen is the arbitration system needs to be eliminated, and there needs to be a different system in place for guys to become free agents much sooner. Which
is good for the players.
Which is great for the players. It might hurt the leverage of the teams, but if you look at some of these extensions that have just happened, whether it's elite players like Mike Trout and Nolan Arenado, or even whether it's guys who haven't even played yet and are rookies like Eloy Jimenez for the White Sox, or even Ronald Acuna for the Braves, who hasn't done much yet in the league, but clearly has already shown himself to be a star type player. That all these extensions prove that if you're good enough to play, you will get paid. But if you wait too long to get paid, you might not. Now that the way the current system is, so you're going to get an extension and a big contract offer if you've proven yourself early. But most major league players, it takes them 4 or 5 years to get through the minor league system. Most guys takes 4 or 5 years to really establish themselves as major leaguers. The guy the Giants just traded for, Kevin Pillar, is in his 30s now. He's still not to where he's going to be a free agent, and he's the more typical baseball player. He's not a first-round pick. He battled his way through the minors. He battled his way to become a starter for the Blue Jays. He's got flaws,
but he's going to hit 40 home runs for the Giants this
absolutely.
year. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, but even when he becomes a free agent, no team is going to offer him a huge contract. It's just not going to happen. And it might have happened a few years ago, and maybe that's a problem. Maybe that shouldn't be the case. But it shouldn't still be a situation where a guy in his mid-30s still hasn't become a free agent. It should happen sooner. So if you were to eliminate arbitration, what could happen is that you still use the 2 years of service before you can become a free agent. The way it is now, where it's 2 years before you become arbitration eligible. But instead, similar to like what the NBA has, where you have like a rookie contract. In the NBA, after 2 years, I think it's this way, but even if it's not, just work with me on the numbers here. But if it's like after 2 years, you can sign an extension, and then for 2 more years, and then become a free agent, something like that, right? Because you have like a player option, and you have a way of extending that deal.
And the NBA players seem to have increasing flexibility and control over their futures, which I think is what we're talking about here, right?
Well, I think a lot of times too, if a guy knew that after 2 years of service, he could sign an extension for 2 more years or become a free agent, then after his rookie year, him and his agent can start working with the team on do we want to keep him for 2 more years?
Yeah.
Do we want to extend him? Considering the way baseball is going right now, the Tampa Bay Rays are giving Blake Snell a big contract. It's like, these guys that are getting big deals, they don't necessarily have a lot of service time yet. Mm-hmm. And that's the other part of it too, is that service time isn't calendar years. It's time in Major League Baseball. So if you keep getting sent down, it affects your time. So to get to 2 years of service might take some guy 4 years. Mm-hmm. Depending on.
And then teams are now trying to manipulate that a little bit.
Right. I mean, the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and other guys, they're not in Major League Baseball right now because the Blue Jays are waiting for the deadline to where this year won't count as a full season. Yeah. Which is ridiculous because he should be in the major leagues. But with all that and all that manipulation, if you make it where after 2 years they could become a free agent, but more than likely they'll get an extension for 2 more years. Maybe you have it to where there's a limit to how much you can give them on that 2-year extension. So if you wanted to give them more money, you'd have to give them a 3 or 4 year deal. Then that could help teams that are worried about big bloated contracts, but also get rid of arbitration, which is literally a team going into an arbitrator and saying, this is why this player stinks. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the player's like, this is why I'm good. Yeah. And then the arbitrator decides. And it's like, why would, after 2 years of working with a guy and trying to make him a great player, would you spend your entire energy on, this is why this guy does not deserve a contract? Like, that just seems counterproductive to trying to build an environment of a good business a good business relationship.
Not
right?
very player oriented either.
Right. So, let's say it's 2 years and then you can become a free agent or sign a 2-year extension. And then after those 4 years, you can sign a new contract or become a free agent. But then after those 4 years, instead of what would essentially be 6, you can become a free agent. So that 2 years sooner would make such a difference for guys. And it would also be 4 years sooner if a team decided not to continue with someone, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you look at like Giants now, like Joe Panic would have had to make a decision on Joe Panic a year earlier than just these 1-year arbitration contracts. Mm-hmm. And they probably would have stuck with him and given him a 2-year deal. And then he'd be on the first year of a 2-year deal now. Mm-hmm. And then, another year from now, he'd become a free agent instead of having to wait an additional couple of years. So I think it would ultimately give the players a lot more flexibility. It would put a little bit more pressure on the teams to make decisions, but they do that in arbitration anyway, with whether they decide to cut a player. The Giants cut Hunter Strickland and Gorkys Hernandez this year because they didn't want to pay him what they would have made in arbitration. Mm-hmm. So they're still making those decisions on these players year by year with arbitration. I just think it should be to where they're not arbitration eligible for 4 years. And basically the teams have their rights for that long of a time where the player has no flexibility. Yeah. That doesn't make sense to me.
Tony Clark, please. Players Association president. Yeah, this is Mark Otten calling. I have a cousin over here with some good ideas. Watch our podcast, youtube.com/good ideas. No,
/good ideas. Why don't we jump into?
I have a missed call. I really have a missed call, but it's not him. Well, actually, I don't know. We'll find out later.
Well, let's get to your ideas for, or not your ideas for, but your thoughts about the strikeout walk. Kind of epidemic.
Yeah. So in recent years, everybody's been striking out and hitting home runs. The overall, I think, runs scored per game has been relatively stable. It's just that people are hitting home runs and swinging for the fences and striking out all the time. And so these pitchers, like I remember last year it was Anibal Sanchez, I think it was, who came in, and there's another guy whose name escapes me. I think he came back and pitched for the A's. These guys like maybe Brett Anderson, one of these guys that are veterans and like were basically like on the edge of retirement. They come back, they're like, all right, we're gonna give it one more go round, and then suddenly they're striking everybody out. It's like their strikeout totals just go up, and I'm thinking, okay, well that's quite a late career comeback for this guy. But then I'm like, hold on a minute, like if he's doing this and striking everybody out, then it's not necessarily the pitchers.
Right.
It's. I mean, it is to a certain extent when you get these Josh Hader and Reyes Moronta types of pitchers that just like throw smoke and like. I mean, to a certain extent, you can understand when they're striking everybody out. But we're seeing these lines where like it's 34 innings pitched, 71 strikeouts, and it's like what the heck's going on in baseball, you know? And there's a lot of concern over pace of play, and strikeouts are not helping pace of play. So it's becoming increasingly a strikeout home run kind of league. And if you look at the overall league stats over the last 10 years, it's really changed a lot. So, like, is this a problem? Like, should we fix this, or should we just let baseball go and see what happens and such? I mean, we had so that's the question. I don't necessarily have a specific solution to this, nor do I think that a solution is needed. But if pace of play is the goal, then I think more balls in play is going to be definitely useful. There's also hitting philosophies now that are changing, right? Like in how about another Christy Mathewson reference? In Christy Mathewson's era, guys were taking short swings, probably off of choked up bats, and just trying to punch balls to the opposite field, trying to get on base, because it wasn't even really that possible to hit home runs. They were just trying to do anything to get on. Bunting was probably a lot more common, in the old days. So the philosophies have changed. So why have philosophies changed? Well, you're seeing these relief pitchers come in throwing really hard, and there's a lot of specialization these days. So you see lefty on lefty matchups that are really tough, right? So guys are unable to make contact, so they're thinking, well, if we're unable to make contact as often, why don't we at least swing with a purpose when we do swing and see what happens? So hitting coaches, I think, are to be consulted on this as well, as far as like, why is this happening? But anyway, I think there's some things that I've thought about, including this proposal to limit pitchers to require pitchers to face a minimum of 3 batters when they come in. That would reduce the specialization. That would take some of these left-handed relief pitchers and maybe put them out of a job. So I'm not sure about that. But if you did limit the specialization a little bit, then you'd probably increase the ability of the hitters to make contact a little bit more often. Right. So that's one thing. But I'm not necessarily in favor of that, just because, like I said, it does take jobs away from pitchers potentially. So I don't know, your thoughts on a solution to getting a few more balls in play.
Well, I think we're in a transitional period in baseball, because it's been like a decade straight where there's been more strikeouts and less runs like every year. It's been pretty consistent. So it's not a new thing, but I do think with all the technology that has come about for everybody, for hitters, for pitchers. Hitters are seeing that it makes no sense to swing at a pitch that's not where they want it to be in the zone. Like there's no reason to swing at a low and away pitch that's not they can't do anything with, so they avoid it. And what it means is that sometimes they'll get called strikes. Sometimes it means that they'll extend in the bat, and some different things. So it clearly is partly because there are smarter hitters and smarter pitchers about where to throw, where not to throw. Every pitcher on every night knows exactly where they shouldn't throw the ball to a hitter, and to every hitter. Yeah. And they know exactly where they should. They know exactly where their hot and cold zones are, all those kind of things. And when you look at all of that, it's almost impossible to then police that. Because it's not like you're going to tell them they're not allowed to see that information. Right. And so
maybe this is just where we're headed with the technology.
So I think it's partly where we're headed, because there's too many smart pitchers out there. There's too many smart hitters out there, and it doesn't make financial sense for a hitter to bunt a runner over and sacrifice themselves when they can get a bigger contract not doing that anymore. Because that's not required of them anymore. You talk about pace of play. We'll use Giants for this example, but Brett Butler bunts his way on to first. Robbie Thompson swings at the first pitch to knock him over, to move him over to second. And now you've got the middle of your order that's just looking to put a ball in the outfield for a base hit. They're not trying to hit a home run. Or if Butler steals third, or even more to the point, Butler bunts his way on Thompson, and then he steals second. Thompson, moves him over to third.
Small ball. And,
Will Clark hits a sacrifice fly. That could happen in the sense of 6 pitches. Yeah. And you've got, and the other team's already got an out,
Yeah.
And and now there's nobody on base, so there's no rally, so it's like that inning could possibly end quickly. And so with all that being said, none of that's happening anymore. Guys aren't bunting their way on. They're not trying to get on the first pitch.
Right.
You're trying to work a starter to get to a team's bullpen.
Yeah.
You're trying to work the count as much as you can. You're trying to find your pitch. Anytime Buster Posey's ever been interviewed after a game, and it's like, what was the approach in that at bat? I was just looking for something up in the zone to put the barrel of the bat on. Well, that's kind of all that baseball's ever been. It's just that guys have been are understand a little bit more about how to do that and when to do that. So I think as the technology's improved, we're all adjusting to how to then handle it. So not to bring a proposal and then have nothing to say, but I also think that we're not going to know really how to handle it yet, because there's too much information out there that people are using, from guys at Driveline to wherever, of like how to maximize your talent, maximize your ability to do your job successfully. That's evolving with every month, let alone every year.
Yeah. And I think periodically, guys will sort of outsmart the game. I mean, that's how these games change, right? You realize something, you're all trying to, everybody's trying to have success. I think one thing that baseball did do, was it 1969 or 1970, somewhere in that range, was that I think they did they lower the mound?
It was after 68, so I don't know if it was 69, but the 68 season was the infamous Bob Gibson and Koufax. And
like everybody just dominated the league.
And they were like, we can't have this, 1 ERA for every pitcher. Like,
right.
We need to have some runs.
So theoretically, then we could do that again. Right, and we could lower it a little bit more, which makes it harder for the pitcher theoretically, and I guess it did at that point. Like the next year, there was more offense, and so then there would be more offense the following year. But where we're at now, it's not necessarily that the runs scored are down. I think they are a little bit. It's just that batting averages are down. So like what that would do, I think if you lowered the mound at this point, you would there would be fewer strikeouts, but home runs are still pretty far up there.
Yeah.
So suddenly, the following year, Aaron Judge hits 70 home runs.
Right.
You know what I mean? So one edit brings about a whole different set of changes to the game. And once you raise and lower the mound, that kind of thing, that changes literally the dimensions of what's going on. Changes the game to a point where we do mess with tradition a little bit. We do mess with the history of it, probably more than we want to. So we have a null hypothesis in the sense that we're concluding that
we're looking into it though.
We're nothing should be done yet, but we're noticing this change, and I think others are too, with regard to strikeouts, going up all across the league.
All right, so why don't we wrap this up with what's kind of become a theme of these shows, which is the anti-tanking, and what we can do to help kind of fix that, because that's an issue for every sport, is when teams are out of it, what do we do? So what's some ideas you have for helping limit either eliminate that or at least minimize that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been talk of that more than ever, I think, in baseball, right?
Right.
It seems
a lot of teams are tanking.
It seems like teams are making the decision to compete or not compete earlier and earlier. I think, historically, every team's in it until about July 1st, maybe the All-Star break, and then teams that are down in the bottom of the standings at that point start to think about the trade deadline, think about who they can unload and reload with young talent.
And the wild card certainly helped with that. Was more teams were in it.
True.
So that certainly helped.
True. So, but then now it's like, we got the Baltimore Orioles right now that pretty much are tanking from the beginning of the year. They're not even trying.
And they're not the only team.
Yeah, and I mean, occasionally, like last year, Tampa Bay was sort of in that boat, and then sure enough, in the second half of the season, they turned it on, and now they're probably competing a little bit more this year. So teams can do that. They're still up 4-0 against the Giants.
They're competing a little bit this year.
There's some progress there, but in other words, we don't want Baltimore Orioles fans to have to sit through this year because they're just waiting on next year or the year after.
Well, I'm bringing up Tampa Bay. I mean, if you have a rule where like we talked about with the minor leagues in a previous podcast, how the second half team gets to make the playoffs. The Rays make the playoffs last year if the second half record, if second half record only mattered.
Yeah.
And that would mean that, let's say the Orioles started winning out of nowhere with this team of guys that no one's ever heard of, and, and they start getting hot, that it's more likely they get hot, in after the All-Star break versus the beginning of the year because they're brand new to the sport in a lot of cases. Well, that would suddenly bring about a bunch of excitement in Baltimore for a team that's all of a sudden up and coming. And certainly in Tampa, how much more exciting would last year have been had that second half really mattered?
Yeah, it breaks it up into sort of more manageable pieces, right? Like if the Orioles are looking at their future and they're like, well, we're not going to compete this year, so let's go for 2020, right? And something like that, or even for them maybe 2021. I don't know.
Right.
But if instead of that, they're thinking, okay, maybe we're talking about the Blue Jays now. The Blue Jays have these guys like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette, right? Dante's son. All these guys that are sons of former big leaguers. But
the Warriors' approach of Steph Curry and Klay Thompson.
Right, yeah. So there you go. So then they're looking at a pretty bright future right now, or maybe
eventually.
Right now, or last year the Atlanta Braves were similar. Right. They had some young guys coming up, right? So they're breaking it into pieces, and the Rays last year, where maybe they're thinking right out of the gate in April, we're still young, we don't really know who we have yet, but we're a young team. Maybe we'll find something by the All-Star break. Then they find that thing, like Tampa Bay last year, maybe Toronto this year. They start to find it, and so then there's a door open with the second half record being a possible opportunity.
Well, and that's not and for baseball, that's not a ridiculous idea because they do it in the minors. And it might seem ridiculous because the major league season should matter. And how you do in the first half should matter. But then if you win the first half, you are guaranteed a playoff spot. That's a lot of pressure off of a team. You look at a team like Boston last year that was crushing everybody. And then that last month or so didn't matter. And in Cleveland too, because Cleveland had a really horrible division last year. And so they basically had their division won in like May. Not technically, but I mean kind of, because every team in that division was tanking other than them. So by May or June, they basically knew they were making the playoffs. And they showed it by not really playing well against anybody, because they beat the snot out of the other 4 teams in their division the 19 times they played them each time. And they didn't have to be good against everybody else, and they weren't. So, the Indians not doing well enough to, in the first half to make the playoffs or whatever, compared to the other teams, would incentivize them to play harder in the second half against other teams or whatever. Or if they didn't play well in the second half, the Rays could unseat them maybe or whatever. It's like there should be incentive to play well at all times. And it would be nice if a team like the Red Sox was already guaranteed a playoff spot so they could rest some guys through the second half of the season. But that would bring the same kind of problems where now they're tanking technically because they don't have to win. That's not good for baseball either. So instead of implementing the exact same rules as the minor leagues, which is the first half champ is automatically enter into the playoffs, which I wouldn't agree with, but I'm just saying that's what they do.
Right.
Minor leagues, it makes way more sense because there's so much turnover in the minors. But in Major League Baseball, no matter what your first half record is, the second half record can can determine one of the playoff spots. And if that's the case, then teams that are on the cusp have to keep winning. And a team like Boston last year that had the best record, the total best record will still be the number 1 seed. Like they'll still be the team that has the home field. So there's still incentive for them to keep winning. But that a team like Tampa Bay could maybe unseat somebody else who didn't win as much in the second half.
And it kind of breaks the tanking decision and makes it, you have to make it multiple times. Like the Orioles are like, all right, we're going to tank this year in April. And then like July comes around and they're like, okay, yeah, we're still going to tank the second half. And then like next April, and it's like you have to decide that twice per year now.
Well, Atlanta was going to tank last year. They brought up all these young guys, had no expectations, and then they started playing well.
Right. Yeah.
So there would be even more incentive for them to go for it in the second half if they knew that having the best record in the second half would have given them a better seed in the playoffs or something to that effect.
Right.
And, so a team that baseball will always have teams that win when they're not supposed to, and will always have teams that lose when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens in the same season, like the 2016 Giants.
Mm-hmm.
Like best record in baseball. To start the year, the All-Star break, they had the best record in baseball.
Yeah.
They had the second worst record in baseball the second half of the year.
Yeah, we will not blame Santiago Casilla for that at all.
No,
it's not his
in
fault.
fact, on a side note, if they had just had him pitch the ninth, they would have won that game instead of pitching 15 guys.
Okay.
But whatever, I'm not still bitter about that.
We're talking about the Cubs and the playoffs.
I am still kind of
well,
bitter.
congratulations to the 2016 Cubs anyway.
But to piggyback off that, the 2016 Cubs and the 2017 Astros and the whatever year the Red Sox won.
Like 18, yeah.
Yeah, it was 18. Well, no, but they won, didn't they? Because they tanked like for a year.
I don't remember.
They had like the worst record, and they didn't really tank. But the Cubs and the Astros are the two best examples of how tanking can work.
Yeah.
And when tanking works, that only incentivizes teams to do the same. Yeah. Because in the short term, they save a ton of money. In the long term, they might end up with some top 5 picks in the draft that could become, Steven Strasburg, Bryce Harper, type players. Could be George Springer, Carlos Correa, Alex Bregman type players. Can be Chris Bryant. The players that you can get for tanking are some of the best players in baseball sometimes, and it can help you become relevant much quicker. And then you can go out and get free agents and make trades and become relevant pretty fast. And so I think having a second half team rule that one of the teams that makes the playoffs can be a team that just wins the second half. And if, for example, if the Red Sox won the second half, last year, then the Rays still don't go. But if a team that isn't playoff eligible based on their overall record had the best record in the league, there's no reason to me that they shouldn't deserve to make the playoffs. Because you also, like we talked about in the football podcast, you would get one of the hottest teams in baseball in the playoffs. And the team they would be replacing doesn't necessarily have that many more wins than they do, and they clearly didn't play as well in the second half. So you're getting a hotter team who's playing better baseball. So it's a better product in October. And then it would make that much more incentive for that team that's got 86 wins and is technically going to be the second wild card to play better. Because they need to. So it actually would make them play harder.
And it'll break up the logic of making trades at the trade deadline too, because a lot of these teams, like the Orioles, are going to try to unload whatever veterans that they have that have value in order to get young players. But if there's a second half possibility, then maybe they're not going to do that, or they're less likely to do that. Anyway, I got one more for you that is sort of related that we didn't plan on. I just thought of while we were talking about this tanking stuff. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, last one. That is the problem with the playoffs is that
the Giants weren't in
it. The Giants are not in it every year. No. Done. No. The problem with the playoffs is that the 162 game season, right? Then we get into the playoffs. We got these short series, especially the division series, which is best of 5 game. Sometimes it's like one game. It's like a coin flip sometimes, right? Like if there's a grand slam in the second inning of a game, like when Brandon Crawford hit the grand slam against the Pirates. The Pirates, this glorious year, they had a lot of success that year. Andrew McCutchen, everybody else, they're like done. Like it's just they don't have
that
much
quickly after 162.
Right. So then also like I was talking about in our college basketball podcast, the best team, the team that actually has the in the long term the best chances of being the best team, doesn't win because it's just kind of dumb luck that they just weren't prepared for the playoffs, or they short series, they got behind too quick or whatever it is.
Well, Duke just lost, right?
And Duke just lost, exactly. Yeah, I thought of that actually when they did lose. But anyway, like if we really want the playoffs to win the World Series winner to reflect the best team, then we're doing something different. We're stretching out the playoff series, like especially division series. I think my small solution here is to just make the division series best of 7 instead of best of 5, just so that we can get like a little bit more continuity.
And the wild card could be best of 3. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be best of 1.
Wild card could be best of 7 too. I don't know. Like I mean, or we could even extend it further than that. I mean, I think when the World Series first started, it was best of 9. Like, I'm not opposed to that. I think the teams would get tired of each other after a while. But
I think it's mostly weather related. Why we've got to be careful about how long we make each series.
Yeah.
Or we could also shorten the regular season.
Well, I was just going to say we could go back to 154 game regular season instead of 162, and use those 8 games as playoff games.
Right. Or use those games as extra days off.
Yeah. Another thought I had on this was to mix things around a little bit, like they do in a couple of the European soccer formats. They have different teams play different teams. It's like a little bit of a round robin kind of format, and then like the College World Series, the best teams that emerge from these pools, let's say, then go on to the World Series, something along those lines. So there's a little bit more like if it's a matchup problem, or if it's like certain team is a bad matchup for another. Maybe we have a few more games that are sort of round robin style, and then we go in. That would sort of be less realistic, and would kind of blow up the system a little bit more. But anything for me that extends it out such that the teams that are actually the best have the best chance of winning, I think would be my choice. But then again, the 2010 Giants rolled through the playoffs, and did they have the best record in the regular season? Probably not. Were they the best team in September? Probably. But whatever happened in 2010, I'm thankful for it. So I'm not necessarily.
We want to make some rule changes, but we're not changing what happened in 2010.
That's right, exactly. Or 2012.
Or
2014, exactly.
All right, well, hey, we thank you for listening to our very detailed and specific podcast about baseball. We hope that you agreed with us on all of our points. If you disagreed, please let us know in the comments how much you disagree with us.
We have enabled the comments. Please comment.
And
nicely.
And we'll be back in a few weeks to talk about your next favorite sport and what we should do to fix it.
A prediction for the Giants' record in 2019, whatever year it is.
They will win.
The game.
A few games.
At least 3. 3 and 159. Is that?
Dusty Baker used to always say that every team wins 50 and loses 50,
okay.
And then it's what you do in the other 62, right? So
all right, okay.
They'll win at least 50.
All right.
Now I'll go
and lose at least 50.
Yeah, I'll go with let's see. I'll go 81 and 81 just to be optimistic.
That's optimistic. I'm going to say
you know what? It's Bochy's last year, 82 and 80.
I'm going to say 78 wins.
Let's give him an 80.
But the best record in the second half, and
they make the playoffs.
By our rules, they would make the playoffs.
All right. Until next time, have a good one, guys.